The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Chapel, casting prisms of fading color across the marble altar, where Eleanor Blackwood knelt alone in her wedding gown. The ivory silk and Belgian lace that had been commissioned 6 months prior now felt heavy as armor against her trembling body, the delicate beading collecting her fallen tears like morning dew. "How could he do this to me?" she whispered to the empty chapel, her voice barely audible above the muffled sounds of departing carriages and hushed gossip from beyond the great oak doors. The whispers would already be spreading through London society like wildfire. Viscount James Harrington, heir to the Westfield earldom, had not appeared to claim his bride. The pews that had been filled with 400 of London's elite now stood empty, the white rose garlands wilting in the warm May air, their sweet fragrance turning sickly as they drooped from neglect. Eleanor clutched the small gold band she'd been meant to slide onto James' finger, the metal warming against her palm as if mocking the coldness spreading through her chest. 3 years of courtship, of carefully chaperoned walks and proper dances, of letters filled with promises and plans, all evaporated like morning mist. The carefully arranged quartet had packed away their instruments. The bishop had offered awkward condolences before retreating to the vestry. Her own parents had departed with faces etched in humiliation. Her father's final words, a barely concealed accusation. "You must have done something to drive him away." Now, in the growing shadows, Eleanor remained frozen in her abandoned glory, unable to face the world beyond the chapel doors where pity and scandal awaited. Her reputation lay in tatters alongside her heart. At 22 years, with no fortune to recommend her beyond a respectable name, she would be forever marked as the woman rejected at the altar, damaged goods in the calculating marketplace of marriage. No eligible bachelor would risk association with such public rejection. Her pale fingers traced the embroidery on her bodice, each stitch a reminder of dreams now unraveled. The bouquet of lilies and roses lay discarded beside her, the satin ribbons trailing across the stone floor like broken promises. Outside, the bells of London tolled the hour, each resonant chime marking the death of the future she had planned. 5 o'clock. The hour when she should have been departing the chapel as Viscountess Harrington, embarking on her new life. Instead, the only thing awaiting her was disgrace. Eleanor raised her eyes to the crucifix above the altar, searching for solace in the carved face, but found only shadows where the light had retreated. The chapel grew dimmer as clouds gathered outside, matching her darkening thoughts. She remained kneeling, pride and despair warring within her chest, unwilling to face what waited beyond those doors, yet unable to remain forever in this suspended moment of devastation. Then came the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls on stone, followed by the decisive click of the chapel door being locked from within. Eleanor froze at the sound, her tears ceasing abruptly as she turned toward the chapel entrance. The heavy wooden doors had closed with finality, and in the growing shadows stood a tall figure silhouetted against the last remnants of daylight. Even before he stepped forward, she recognized him by reputation alone. Sebastian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ravencrest, known throughout London as the Black Duke. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, whispers of a man so cold and merciless that servants fled his presence and lords avoided his gaze. He moved with predatory grace down the center aisle, each footfall echoing against stone walls as he approached, his features gradually revealed by the flickering candlelight. Eleanor rose unsteadily to her feet, her grief transforming into something sharper, more alert. The Duke was unnervingly handsome in the most forbidding way, with features carved from marble, raven black hair swept back from a commanding brow, and eyes so deeply blue they appeared almost black in the chapel gloom. A thin scar traced from his right temple to jaw, lending him a dangerous aspect that perfectly matched his reputation. "What an interesting situation I find myself in, Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice surprisingly soft yet resonant in the sacred space, the abandoned bride and the man everyone fears, alone in God's house. Eleanor clutched the back of the nearest pew, acutely aware of her vulnerability, her wedding dress a cruel reminder of her position. She had heard countless stories about the Duke since his return from abroad 3 years ago, how he had inherited after his elder brother's mysterious death, how his young wife had perished under suspicious circumstances, how even the Prince Regent gave him wide berth at court functions. Yet despite the menace that clung to him like his perfectly tailored black coat, Eleanor felt an unexpected absence of fear, as though sanctuary extended beyond the chapel walls to this dangerous man. The Duke circled the altar slowly, his gaze never leaving her face, studying her with an intensity that made her heart race for reasons she could not name. His gloved hand traced the altar rail, leather whispering against polished wood as he completed his circuit, coming to stand merely an arm's length from her. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to cower despite her tear-stained cheeks and disheveled appearance. Something flickered in the Duke's expression then, not quite approval but perhaps recognition, as though he had posed a question and received an unexpected answer. Rain began to patter against the stained glass windows, sealing them further in their strange isolation, creating a world apart from London society and its cruel judgments. The chapel grew intimate in its darkness, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor should have been terrified, alone with a man whose name mothers used to frighten disobedient children, yet beneath her apprehension bloomed a strange certainty that while the Duke might represent many dangers, physical harm was not among them. He removed his gloves with deliberate slowness, revealing strong hands marked by what appeared to be burn scars across the knuckles, before offering her his handkerchief, a gesture so at odds with his fearsome reputation that Eleanor found herself accepting it before she had consciously decided to move. The candles guttered in their sconces as evening deepened around them, the last purple light of dusk fading from the windows to leave the chapel in a golden haze of flickering shadows. Eleanor dabbed at her tears with the offered handkerchief, the fine linen carrying the faint scent of sandalwood and something distinctly masculine. Sebastian Blackthorne moved closer, his tall frame casting long shadows across the altar steps where she stood. "I know why Harrington failed to appear today," he said, his voice low and controlled like a carefully wielded weapon. "Your father faces bankruptcy. The papers will be filed tomorrow, and the Viscount, learning of this, chose to protect his family's interests rather than honor his commitment to you." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, shame blooming like poison before transforming into righteous anger. "How dare you?" she whispered, her hands clenching in the folds of her wedding gown. "Is my humiliation now common knowledge for all of London to dissect?" "Not common knowledge," Sebastian replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I make it my business to know things others do not. Your father's shipping company lost 3 vessels in the Atlantic storm last month. No insurance, no recourse, complete ruin." He began to circle her slowly, like a predator assessing his prey, yet without malice. Rather, his gaze held something more calculating, more considered. Eleanor stood her ground, despite the flutter of her pulse, refusing to be cowed by his intimidating presence. The Duke came to a stop before her, close enough that she could see the subtle variations of midnight blue in his eyes, the candlelight reflecting tiny flames within their depths. "I have a proposition, Miss Blackwood," he said, each word precisely chosen and delivered. "Marry me instead, today, and your family's debts will be paid by nightfall." Eleanor felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her feet, his words so unexpected that for a moment she wondered if grief had unhinged her mind. She searched his face for signs of mockery or cruelty, but found only intense seriousness. "Why would the Duke of Ravencrest want to marry me?" she asked, her voice stronger than she felt. "What possible advantage could such a union bring you?" Sebastian reached out, not touching her but bringing his hand close enough to her face that she could feel its warmth. "Reasons that are mine alone, Miss Blackwood, but I assure you they are sufficient. The offer stands, but only in this moment, in this place. By dawn, your family will face social extinction. By next week, debtor's prison for your father." His voice softened a fraction, revealing something almost human beneath the ducal facade. "I offer sanctuary, Miss Blackwood, respectability, protection." The shadows lengthened between them, the space charged with implications both terrifying and oddly compelling. Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that she stood at a crossroads between complete ruin and an arrangement with the most feared man in England. The irony was not lost on her that the very chapel that had witnessed her abandonment might now witness her salvation, albeit in the most unexpected form imaginable. Eleanor retreated to a small side chapel, a sanctuary within a sanctuary, where flickering votive candles cast trembling light upon ancient stone. Here, beneath the watchful gaze of a marble Madonna, she paced the confined space, her wedding gown whispering accusations with every step. The Duke waited in the main chapel, his patience somehow more unnerving than any pressure might have been. Ruin or salvation, Eleanor thought bitterly. What choice was this? To save her family from destitution and her father from prison, she would bind herself to Sebastian Blackthorne, the Black Duke, a man whose very name caused ladies to fall silent at social gatherings. The rumors swirled in her mind like autumn leaves caught in a tempest. His first wife, a gentle country beauty, dead within a year of their marriage. Some whispered of a fall from the parapets of his ancestral home, others of a wasting illness too convenient in its timing. None spoke of foul play directly, yet the implication lingered in significant glances and conversations that ceased upon his approach. Yet something about him defied these simple rumors. The way he had offered his handkerchief, the surprising gentleness in his voice when he spoke of sanctuary, the intelligence in those midnight eyes that seemed to see beyond her tear-stained face to something deeper. Eleanor ran her fingers across the cool stone of the baptismal font, considering her future. As Viscountess Harrington, she would have enjoyed comfort, respectability, perhaps eventually affection. As Duchess of Ravencrest, she would command unimaginable wealth and status, yet live alongside a man who carried darkness like a cloak. A strange certainty settled over her as she made her decision. Whatever fate awaited her as Sebastian Blackthorne's wife, it would not be dull, nor would it be what society expected. She returned to the main chapel, her head high despite the wreckage of her hopes. The Duke stood exactly where she had left him, a statue carved from shadow and candlelight. His eyes followed her approach, revealing nothing of his thoughts. "I accept your offer, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult within. "But understand, this is merely a transaction. I do not expect love, nor do I offer it." Sebastian nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "Love is a luxury few in our position can afford, Miss Blackwood," he replied, his tone neither pleased nor disappointed, merely accepting. "We each gain what we require. That is the foundation of any sensible arrangement." Eleanor felt a peculiar relief at his pragmatism, at the absence of pretense between them. They would enter this union with eyes open, expectations clear. No pretty lies to obscure the nature of their bargain. The air between them hummed with unspoken possibilities, the chapel's hallowed atmosphere lending their agreement a weight beyond mere words. In accepting Sebastian Blackthorne, Eleanor had chosen a path that felt simultaneously like deliverance and damnation, a contract written in shadow, yet promising light. She extended her hand to seal their arrangement, and when his fingers closed around hers, warm and strong despite their scars, she felt the first flicker of curiosity about the man who would soon be her husband. Fresh candles now illuminated the chapel, their golden light creating a strange mirror image of the wedding that should have occurred hours before. An elderly priest with rheumy eyes and gnarled hands stood before the altar, summoned with remarkable speed by Sebastian Blackthorne's valet, who now served as their sole witness. The contrast was stark in Eleanor's mind. Where the morning had seen 400 of London's finest in attendance, now only 3 people watched as she became a duchess under the most peculiar circumstances imaginable. Eleanor stood in the same spot where she had waited in vain for James Harrington, her wedding gown now slightly crumpled, her carefully arranged hair coming loose from its pins. A curious numbness had settled over her, as though she were watching herself from a great distance, a player in someone else's story. The priest began the ceremony with a tremor in his aged voice, his eyes darting nervously between the imposing duke and the pale bride. Sebastian remained utterly composed throughout, his posture perfect, his responses clear and decisive, as though he arranged impromptu weddings in abandoned chapels every fortnight. When the moment came for her to speak her vows, Eleanor found her voice caught somewhere between her heart and throat. "I, Eleanor, "Take thee, Sebastian," she finally managed, each word escaping with visible effort. "To be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward." Her voice trembled as she continued the sacred promises, spoken now to a virtual stranger whose reputation chilled even the bravest hearts in London. His hands felt unexpectedly warm as they held hers, strong and steady, the scarred knuckles a reminder of mysteries she had yet to unravel. In return, Sebastian spoke his vows with perfect control, his deep voice filling the chapel with solemn promises that seemed incongruous with their hasty arrangement. The gold ring he placed on her finger was not the one intended for her by Viscount Harrington. This band was heavier, ancient-looking, engraved with symbols she did not recognize. It slid onto her finger with surprising ease, as though it had been crafted specifically for her hand. The priest pronounced them man and wife with obvious relief, clearly eager to conclude this strange ceremony and depart from the presence of the Black Duke. Eleanor barely heard the final blessing, caught as she was in the surreal quality of the moment. The same day that had begun with her anticipation of becoming a viscountess was ending with her transformation into a duchess, wed to a man whose mere presence caused hardened soldiers to step aside. As Sebastian led her down the aisle, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, Eleanor felt the weight of her new reality settling upon her shoulders. Duchess of Ravencrest, mistress of estates she had never seen, wife to the most feared man in England. The title that should have been a crowning glory felt instead like a gilded cage, albeit one she had entered willingly to save her family from ruin. Yet beneath her apprehension flickered something unexpected. Curiosity about the man who had claimed her so decisively, and the life that now awaited them both. Blackthorn Manor materialized from the darkness like a spectre, its Gothic spires and turrets clawing at the night sky as their carriage approached through wrought iron gates. Moonlight bathed the ancient stone in silver, highlighting gargoyles that peered down from rainspouts and balustrades, their grotesque faces frozen in eternal vigilance. Eleanor gazed through the carriage window, her heart pounding against her ribs as the true magnitude of her decision crystallized before her. The ancestral seat of the Dukes of Ravencrest sprawled across the hillside, windows glowing with warm light that seemed at odds with the forbidding exterior. Sebastian sat opposite her, his face half in shadow, studying her reaction with those unfathomable eyes. The carriage came to a halt before wide stone steps, and footmen appeared as if conjured from the darkness, opening doors and lowering steps with practiced precision. Sebastian descended first, then extended his hand to assist Eleanor, her wedding gown shimmering in the moonlight as she stepped onto the grounds of her new home. Within the grand entrance hall, servants lined the marble floor in 2 perfect rows, their expressions a curious mixture of surprise and apprehension as they beheld their new mistress. A wedding had clearly not been anticipated, yet the household had mobilized with remarkable efficiency. Eleanor felt their curious gazes, the silent questions hanging in the air as Sebastian presented her. "Welcome to your new home, Duchess," he said formally, his voice carrying in the vaulted space. "I have had rooms prepared for you. You will find everything you need." The housekeeper, a formidable woman with steel-grey hair and keen eyes, stepped forward and curtsied deeply. The butler, tall and austere with a face that seemed carved from the same stone as the manor itself, bowed with perfect decorum, despite the obvious shock in his gaze. Eleanor acknowledged them with as much grace as she could muster, aware of her disheveled appearance and the extraordinary circumstances of her arrival. As the staff dispersed to their duties, she caught sight of Sebastian watching her, his expression softening momentarily when he thought no one observed. The vulnerability in that unguarded instant vanished so quickly she might have imagined it, yet it remained imprinted in her mind, like a promise of depths yet unexplored. The great hall stretched before them, dominated by a sweeping staircase that curved upward into shadow. Ancient tapestries adorned walls of dark panelled wood, depicting scenes of battle and hunt from centuries past. Yet amid the foreboding grandeur, unexpected touches of beauty emerged. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, their delicate fragrance softening the air. A fire blazed in the massive hearth, casting dancing light across marble floors. The silence felt heavy with unspoken history, as though the very walls had absorbed the secrets of generations of Blackthorns. Eleanor followed Sebastian up the staircase, her wedding gown rustling against ancient stone, each step carrying her further from the life she had planned into an uncertain future with the man London feared above all others. Eleanor's chambers occupied the entire east wing of the third floor, a suite of rooms so vast and elegant they might have housed a minor royal. Her lady maid, a quiet young woman named Sarah who had been hastily assigned to attend the unexpected Duchess, guided her through the spaces with reverent whispers. A sitting room of pale blue silk walls and delicate French furniture opened to a bedchamber dominated by a massive canopied bed draped in cream and gold. A dressing room beyond held armoires already filled with gowns that somehow appeared to be her size, a mystery Eleanor was too exhausted to contemplate. The moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting long fingers of silver across Turkish carpets and polished wood floors, illuminating luxury that felt curiously impersonal, as though the rooms had been designed to impress rather than comfort. After Sarah helped her change from her wedding gown into a nightdress of finest lawn, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She wandered her new domain, trailing fingertips along surfaces that now belonged to her, yet felt utterly foreign. A small writing desk positioned near the window caught her attention, its drawers empty save for quality paper and writing implements. Upon the desk sat a small silver frame, turned away from casual view as though deliberately hidden yet not removed. Eleanor lifted it curiously, tilting it toward the moonlight to better see the miniature portrait it contained. The shock of recognition froze her in place. The painting depicted Sebastian, unmistakably, yet so transformed that she might have believed it a different man entirely. This younger Sebastian smiled broadly, his eyes alight with joy and mischief, no scar marking his perfect features, no shadows darkening his gaze. He appeared perhaps 20 years of age in the portrait, his hair longer and less severely styled, his entire countenance radiating a carefree happiness that seemed impossible to reconcile with the man who had married her hours earlier. Eleanor stood transfixed, studying every detail of this stranger who was now her husband, wondering what cataclysmic event had transformed this laughing young man into the feared Black Duke. When Sarah returned with warm milk to help her sleep, Eleanor gestured to the portrait with undisguised curiosity. "What happened to him?" she asked softly, "to change him so completely?" The maid glanced nervously toward the door, as though fearing unseen listeners before placing the silver tray carefully upon a side table. "His Grace was different before," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible even in the quiet room, "before the fire, Your Grace." The word hung between them like smoke, heavy with implication. Sarah would say no more despite gentle questioning, excusing herself with a deep curtsy that spoke of both respect and fear. Left alone, Eleanor returned the portrait to its place, her mind racing with questions. She moved to the windows, gazing out across the moonlit grounds of Blackthorn Manor. Somewhere beyond the locked corridors that separated her chambers from his, Sebastian Blackthorn kept his secrets close. What had burned away his smile and joy, leaving behind the controlled, formidable man who now ruled this domain? The mystery of her new husband beckoned like a labyrinth, dangerous perhaps, but irresistibly compelling. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows of the breakfast room, illuminating delicate china and silver with almost painful brightness that belied the tension hovering between its occupants. Eleanor had risen early, determined to confront her new husband, and found him already seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, reading correspondence with the same intense focus he seemed to bring to all tasks. Sebastian looked up as she entered, his customary mask of cool indifference sliding into place, though not before she glimpsed something like wariness in his eyes. "I require answers, Your Grace," she said without preamble, taking the seat to his right and meeting his gaze directly. "The portrait in my chambers, the fire your maid mentioned, and most importantly, your reasons for choosing me as your wife." "No good morning, Duchess," Sebastian replied, his voice carrying a hint of sardonic amusement as he set aside his letters. "You are refreshingly direct for one raised among society whispers." Eleanor poured herself tea with steady hands, refusing to be diverted. "I agreed to a marriage of convenience, not a life of mysteries and half-truths. If we are to build any sort of accord, I must understand what drives the man I have married." Sebastian studied her for a long moment, sunlight highlighting the scar that traced his jawline and disappearing beneath his high collar, where Eleanor suspected more evidence of old injuries lay hidden. "My reasons are my own, Duchess," he said finally, his tone defensive yet something vulnerable flickering beneath the surface. "But know this, I will never harm you, despite what society whispers about me." Eleanor set down her cup with deliberate care. "I did not ask for promises of safety, but for honesty. There is a difference between harm and hurt, Your Grace. One may avoid inflicting pain while still causing deep injury through silence and secrets." A muscle tightened in Sebastian's jaw, and for a moment Eleanor feared she had pushed too far, but then something shifted in his expression, a hairline crack appearing in his carefully constructed facade. "You speak of honesty yet have not asked the question most would consider foremost," he said quietly. "Did I cause the death of my first wife?" Eleanor held his gaze steadily. "I do not believe you capable of such an act," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Whatever demons haunt you, Your Grace, I sense they are of a different nature altogether." A look of astonishment crossed Sebastian's features, quickly masked but undeniably present. "You barely know me," he said, his voice rough with some unnamed emotion. "Yet you make judgments with such confidence." "I trust what I observe, not what I hear whispered behind fans," Eleanor responded. "You may keep your secrets for now, Sebastian, but know that I will discover them eventually." One corner of his mouth lifted in what might almost have been a smile. "I begin to think I have underestimated you, Duchess," he said softly, and for the first time since their hasty wedding, Eleanor felt a spark of genuine connection flicker between them, tenuous yet undeniably real. Lady Winchester's ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles reflected in gilded mirrors, the cream of London society assembled in their finest regalia for the first major event of the season. Eleanor felt Sebastian's hand tense slightly against her back as they paused at the entrance, the herald drawing breath to announce them. The Duchess of Ravencrest. She had practiced this new identity before her mirror that afternoon, yet hearing it proclaimed in that resonant voice sent a shiver along her spine. "The Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest," the herald called, and the buzzing conversation faltered as hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Eleanor lifted her chin, suddenly conscious of the blackthorn diamonds adorning her throat and the midnight blue gown Sebastian had somehow arranged for her in less than a day. The crowd parted before them like water around stone, creating a path through which they processed with deliberate grace. The whispers followed in their wake, speculation both cruel and curious. "Did you hear she was abandoned at the altar by Viscount Harrington only yesterday? He must have married her out of pity. Perhaps she enchanted him somehow. The Black Duke, taking a bride so suddenly." Across the ballroom, Eleanor spotted a familiar figure gone rigid with shock. James Harrington, her former fiancé, stood frozen with a champagne glass halfway to his lips, his face draining of color, as he beheld the woman he had abandoned now on the arm of one of the most powerful men in England. Sebastian guided her through the crowd with perfect courtesy, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts, yet his body positioned subtly between her and any who might approach too boldly. "They fear you," Eleanor whispered as they completed a circuit of the room, noting how conversations stilled in their wake and mothers drew their daughters closer. "No," Sebastian corrected quietly, "they fear what they do not understand," a distinction both significant and revealing. Lady Winchester approached with determined cheer, the first brave soul to acknowledge them directly. "Your Grace, how delightful that you have joined us this evening, and with your new Duchess. My felicitations on your marriage." Eleanor watched in fascination as Sebastian transformed, his forbidding demeanor softening into perfect aristocratic charm. He responded to their hostess with precisely the right blend of gratitude and noblesse oblige, his hand never leaving Eleanor's back, a constant presence both possessive and reassuring. As the evening progressed, other brave souls ventured conversation, curiosity eventually overcoming caution. Eleanor found herself observing her husband with new eyes, as he navigated the social waters with unexpected skill. This was not a man who feared society, but one who understood its machinations intimately yet chose to stand apart. His reputation for coldness seemed increasingly at odds with the subtle ways he shielded her from uncomfortable questions and steered conversations toward topics where she might shine. When the orchestra began a waltz and Sebastian led her onto the floor, Eleanor realized with surprise that she felt not shame or resignation, but a curious pride in walking beside this enigmatic man. Whatever secrets lay in his past, whatever whispers followed in their wake, she found herself increasingly skeptical of society's judgment and curiously eager to discover the truth beneath the legend of the Black Duke. A thunderstorm lashed against the windows of Blackthorn Manor 3 weeks after their hasty marriage, rain streaming down leaded glass panes, while lightning illuminated the grounds in brief, ghostly flashes. Unable to sleep amid the tempest, Eleanor had wandered the darkened corridors until warm light spilling from beneath the library door drew her like a moth to flame. She hesitated before entering, her hand hovering above the brass handle, aware that she risked intruding upon her husband's solitude. Since their confrontation at breakfast and subsequent appearance at Lady Winchester's ball, Sebastian had maintained a careful distance, unfailingly polite yet remote, as though uncertain how to proceed with their unusual arrangement. The thunder crashed overhead, her resolve solidified, and Eleanor pushed open the heavy door. The vast library stretched before her, walls of ancient leather-bound volumes rising 2 stories to a painted ceiling, a fire roaring in the massive stone hearth casting dancing shadows across the room. Sebastian sat at a desk near the fire, his back to the door, so absorbed in his work that he remained unaware of her presence. Ledgers and documents lay spread before him, his elegant hand moving steadily across the pages. Eleanor approached quietly, curiosity overcoming propriety, and caught sight of columns of figures, substantial sums beside names of hospitals, orphanages, and charitable foundations throughout London. Sebastian sensed her presence too late, turning sharply as she reached the desk, his hand moving instinctively to cover the ledgers before resignation crossed his features. "I did not hear you enter, Duchess," he said, making no further attempt to hide the evidence of his charitable works. Eleanor studied him in the firelight, noting how the flames caught the edges of his scar, how his eyes reflected both wariness and something almost like shame at being discovered in this act of kindness, so at odds with his fearsome reputation. "You support these institutions," she said softly, her finger tracing a column showing thousands of pounds distributed to a foundling hospital in the poorest district of London. Sebastian remained silent for a long moment, thunder rumbling overhead like distant artillery. "My scars taught me that appearance and reality seldom align, Duchess," he finally replied, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Those children bear scars no one can see." The simple statement resonated through Eleanor with unexpected force, a window suddenly thrown open onto the soul of the man she'd married. She sank into the chair opposite him, keenly aware that they stood at a threshold neither had anticipated crossing so soon. "Tell me," she whispered, her eyes never leaving his face. "Tell me about the fire." Lightning flashed, illuminating his expression, no longer guarded, but raw with memories that clearly haunted him still. Sebastian closed the ledger with deliberate care, as though gathering courage, then raised his eyes to meet hers fully for perhaps the first time since their wedding day. The story began to unspool between them, punctuated by thunder that seemed to emphasize each painful revelation, the warm sanctuary of the library, creating an intimate space where truth finally emerged from shadow. The Hathaway garden party glowed with the golden light of late afternoon, roses in full bloom perfuming the air, as ladies in summer finery strolled manicured paths beneath parasols, while gentlemen engaged in polite discourse over chilled champagne. Eleanor moved among the guests with growing confidence in her role as Duchess of Ravencrest, her pale green gown drawing admiring glances despite the whispers that still followed in her wake. Sebastian had been drawn into conversation with their host, leaving Eleanor momentarily alone when James Harrington approached, his handsome face flushed with either champagne or anger, perhaps both. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name with inappropriate familiarity, I must speak with you." She maintained her composure, despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest, acutely aware of curious eyes turning in their direction. "Lord Harrington," she acknowledged coolly, conscious of how different she felt from the devastated bride who had knelt weeping in the chapel mere weeks earlier. James stepped closer, lowering his voice, though not enough to prevent nearby guests from straining to overhear. "He married you to spite me, Eleanor. Surely you must realize that. The Black Duke has orchestrated this entire arrangement to humiliate me publicly. Do you truly believe yourself anything but a pawn in his game?" The accusation struck with precision, targeting doubts that had lingered in the darkest corners of her mind, despite the revelations of the library and the gradual thawing between herself and Sebastian. Yet instead of uncertainty, Eleanor felt a surge of indignation rising in her breast, her voice steady and clear as she responded. "You know nothing of the Duke, James. There is more goodness in his silence than in all your pretty words. The man you so casually malign supports orphanages across London while you abandoned me without so much as a note of explanation." James recoiled as though struck, his eyes widening at her unexpected defense. "You cannot possibly prefer him," he hissed, his handsome features contorting. "The man is scarred both inside and out, a monster playing at being human." Only then did Eleanor notice Sebastian, standing motionless several paces behind James, his face impassive, though something flickered in his eyes as they met hers across the sunlit garden. How many seconds he had been there, how much he had heard, she could not know, but the intensity of his gaze suggested he had witnessed enough. "What I prefer, James, is honesty," Eleanor replied, stepping around her former fiancé with newfound dignity. "Sebastian has never pretended to be what he is not, while you, I fear, have never been honest even with yourself." She moved towards Sebastian, aware of the tableau they created against the backdrop of roses and manicured hedges, the beautiful setting contrasting sharply with the ugly scene unfolding within it. Without hesitation, Eleanor took her husband's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath the impeccable tailoring of his coat, sensing rather than seeing the subtle shift in his expression that only she had learned to recognize. "Shall we walk by the lake, Your Grace?" she suggested, guiding them away from James and the avid listeners surrounding them. Sebastian covered her hand with his own as they strolled away, and though he spoke not a word, the gentle pressure of his fingers conveyed volumes about the impact of what had just transpired between them. Summer lightning split the midnight sky above Blackthorn Manor, illuminating the grounds in harsh white flashes as rain lashed against stone walls and leaded windows. Eleanor had retired early, exhausted from the confrontation at the garden party, when frantic pounding at her chamber door jolted her from half-slumber. "Fire in the west wing," her maid gasped, face pale with terror. The old tapestries caught when lightning struck the roof. Eleanor hurried through smoke-filled corridors, the acrid scent burning her lungs as she joined the chaotic scene of servants forming water brigades from the nearby well. Through the billowing smoke, she glimpsed Sebastian directing efforts with calm authority, his voice cutting through panic as he organized the household. Then came the cry that froze blood in veins. Young Thomas, a footman barely 16 years of age, remained trapped in the servants' quarters above. Before anyone could intervene, Sebastian shed his coat and plunged into the blazing wing, disappearing into rolling clouds of black smoke and hungry orange flames. Minutes stretched like hours as Eleanor stood transfixed, heart thundering against her ribs, a silent prayer forming on her lips for both the boy and the husband. She realized with sudden clarity she could not bear to lose. When Sebastian emerged carrying the unconscious footman, his shirt had burned away, revealing a landscape of twisted scars covering his back and shoulders, testament to ancient suffering. He handed the boy to waiting servants before collapsing to his knees, coughing violently as rain soaked his burned flesh. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of her chambers where Sebastian had been brought despite his protests, Eleanor gently bathed his new wounds, her touch tender on damaged skin as the physician departed with instructions for ongoing care. Sebastian lay face down on her bed, vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed, the remnants of his carefully constructed walls crumbling in the aftermath of pain and exhaustion. "My first wife died in a fire," he confessed into the silence, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. "I could not save her. I have never forgiven myself." The words hung between them, heavy with years of carried guilt as lightning continued to illuminate the sky beyond her windows. Eleanor completed her ministrations with gentle hands, understanding blooming within her heart as pieces of his mystery finally aligned into coherent form. Not the monster of rumor who had caused his wife's death, but a man haunted by his inability to prevent it, carrying scars both visible and hidden as penance for perceived failure. Her fingers traced the edge of an old burn with infinite tenderness, her touch conveying acceptance where words would have been insufficient. Sebastian turned his head slightly to meet her gaze, his eyes revealing a soul laid bare at last. No longer the feared Black Duke, but simply a man who had suffered unimaginable loss and blamed himself for a tragedy beyond his control. Midnight deepened over Blackthorn Manor, the storm finally retreating to leave behind an expectant stillness, broken only by occasional drips from rain-soaked eaves. Eleanor sat by her bedchamber window, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, watching the clouds part to reveal stars like scattered diamonds across black velvet. Sebastian had been moved to his own chambers hours earlier, the physician assuring her his new burns would heal without lasting damage, unlike the ancient scars that mapped his back like territories of pain. A soft knock at her door startled her from contemplation. Sebastian stood in the doorway, dressed in a loose shirt and trousers, his hair damp from bathing, his face drawn with exhaustion yet somehow lighter, as though some tremendous weight had shifted. "I came to thank you for your care," he said, his voice lacking its usual precise control. Few would have shown such kindness to a man with my reputation. Eleanor gestured for him to enter, suddenly aware of the intimacy of her chambers illuminated only by gentle candlelight, the hour far beyond propriety. Yet none of that seemed to matter after the night's revelations. "You needed help," she said simply. "All else is secondary." Sebastian moved toward her with the careful steps of a man still in pain, stopping before the window where moonlight now streamed through parting clouds. "I never spoke of that night to anyone," he admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on the window frame. "Not until you. Something has changed between us, Eleanor. I cannot name it, yet I feel its presence as surely as this manor beneath our feet." Eleanor rose to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to see the play of candlelight across the features that no longer seemed forbidding, but merely guarded by old sorrows. "I feel it too," she whispered, the truth of her words surprising her with their intensity. Neither could later say who moved first, only that the distance between them vanished as naturally as mist before morning Sunday. Sebastian's lips found hers with gentle hesitation that bloomed into certainty, his hands cradling her face as though she were something precious beyond measure. The kiss deepened, walls crumbling between them like ancient fortifications no longer needed, no longer wanted. "I never expected to feel anything again," he confessed when they finally drew apart, his forehead resting against hers, breath mingling in the quiet space between them. "You have awakened something I thought died long ago." Eleanor traced the scar along his jaw with trembling fingers, seeing not the fearsome Black Duke but simply Sebastian, a man of deep feeling and profound honor beneath his carefully constructed armor. Their marriage of convenience, formed in haste and desperation, transformed in that moment to something neither had anticipated, a connection built not on necessity but on understanding, on seeing the truth of each other beyond society's expectations or judgments. As Sebastian drew her close again, his kiss deeper and more certain, Eleanor realized that sometimes the heart finds its true home in the most unexpected of places, even within the arms of the man all London feared. The morning light streamed through the stained glass of St. Mary's Chapel, casting rainbows across marble floors where once Eleanor had knelt in abandoned despair. 6 months had passed since that fateful day, transforming her from jilted bride to cherished wife, a journey neither she nor Sebastian could have foreseen. Now they returned as guests for the wedding of Viscount James Harrington to Miss Amelia Rothschild, an American heiress whose fortune had apparently succeeded where Eleanor's modest charms had failed. Sebastian squeezed her hand gently as they took their seats, his presence steady and reassuring beside her. The irony of their return was not lost on either of them, nor on the assembled guests who cast curious glances at the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest. Their story now, the favourite tale of redemption among romantic souls in London society. The ceremony proceeded with appropriate solemnity until the bishop asked if any present knew just cause why the couple should not be Wednesday. James Harrington, it seems, was not destined to enjoy an uninterrupted wedding day. It was Lord Pemington who rose, a distant cousin to James and long-time enemy of Sebastian. "I know cause," he announced to the gasping congregation. "The Duke of Ravencrest should not be permitted in this holy place. I have proof that he deliberately set the fire that killed his first wife, and attempted the same with the west wing of his own home not 3 months past." Sebastian went rigid beside Eleanor, his face a mask of controlled fury as whispers erupted through the chapel. James turned from his bride, his expression a curious mixture of shock and vindication as Pemington produced papers he claimed were sworn statements from former servants. It was Eleanor who rose, her voice clear and unwavering in the suddenly hushed space. She withdrew from her reticule documents of her own, medical records and statements from the physician who had treated Sebastian after rescuing his first wife from their burning home, attestations to the terrible burns he had suffered in his failed attempt to save her. "I have here proof of his innocence," she declared. "Years of charitable giving to hospitals for burn victims, letters from the boy he saved from our own fire, testimonials from those who know the truth rather than vicious gossip. The man I feared in that chapel months ago is not the man I have come to love. You abandoned me, James, but in doing so you led me to my true happiness." Sebastian stood beside her, his expression transformed with wonder at her fierce defense, his hand finding hers as though anchoring himself against a tide of emotion previously unknown. Pemington's accusations dissolved beneath the weight of Eleanor's evidence and the undeniable devotion evident between the Duke and his Duchess. The congregation witnessed not the feared Black Duke of legend, but a man vindicated by love, his scars badges of heroism rather than marks of villainy. As they departed the chapel where their journey had begun, Eleanor felt the circle close around them, a chapter ending as another began. The light that now filled the sacred space seemed a reflection of the truth that had finally dispelled shadows of doubt and rumor, leaving only the certainty of their unexpected but profound connection. Spring sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the small chapel nestled within the grounds of Blackthorn Manor, bathing the intimate space in kaleidoscope colors that danced across white roses and lilies adorning every surface. 1 year from the day Sebastian had found Eleanor weeping alone in St. Mary's, they stood together before the same elderly priest who had hastily married them, though this time no desperation or calculation guided their hearts. Eleanor wore not a borrowed wedding gown but a creation of pale gold silk that caught the light as Sebastian gazed down at her with undisguised adoration, the scar on his face now a badge of honor rather than shame. The staff of Blackthorn Manor filled the pews, no longer fearful of their master but protective and proud of the couple who had transformed not only each other but the very spirit of the ancient house. Where shadows and whispers had once ruled, laughter and light now prevailed, the West Wing rebuilt stronger than before, just as the bonds between them had been forged in fire rather than destroyed by it. Sebastian took Eleanor's hands in his own, his voice steady and clear as he spoke, vows no longer recited from duty but flowing from the deepest chambers of his heart. "When I locked those chapel doors, I sought only to offer you escape from scandal," he said softly, the words meant for her alone though they carried in the perfect acoustics of the sacred space. "I never imagined you would free me from a prison of my own making." Eleanor responded with her own promises, her amber eyes shining with tears of joy rather than the sorrow that had marked their first meeting. Where once she had pledged herself to a stranger out of necessity, now she bound herself to a man she knew in every meaningful way, whose strengths and vulnerabilities were as familiar to her as her own. The priest blessed their union as spring breeze carried the scent of awakening gardens through open windows, the manor itself seeming to exhale a sigh of contentment as ancient ghosts were finally laid to rest. As they walked back down the aisle, arm in arm, servants tossed rose petals in their path, the solemn housekeeper smiling through tears, the austere butler bowing with genuine respect. Outside, the grounds of Blackthorn Manor stretched before them, no longer forbidding but vibrant with new growth, gardens replanted, paths cleared, the gargoyles that had once seemed menacing now appearing more like guardians keeping watch over the happiness within. Sebastian drew Eleanor close as they paused on the chapel steps, his hand resting with gentle possessiveness over her stomach where their child grew. The future Duke or Duchess of Ravencrest who would know only love and light, rather than fear and shadow. The manor that had once been whispered about in terror would become a sanctuary for generations to come, its legacy rewritten by the abandoned bride who found strength in despair, and the feared Duke who discovered redemption in her arms.